Hi, I'm Freedom Coder, and in this video, and for now, probably last part of the PCG tutorial series, I'm going to do a breakdown of the whole jungle tool that has started this series. So this is essentially as far as I got with investigating and trying around with PCG tools. So for now, that's all the information I can share. I'll keep investigating and keep playing around with it. And if I come across something that's really like not yet covered and interesting, I'll continue doing videos. But yeah, let's get into this. So this tool is made with all the techniques that I have covered in the previous videos. There's nothing in here that is like new. It's just, more complex. Essentially, this graph generates a forest, cuts a path through it, and populates the path with like assets. And also, if you have rivers, it spawns like rocks on the shoreline and also cuts through the forest. And all this happens on a custom blueprint that has a few exposed variables to configure what is being generated, because this tool is very heavy to actually generate everything. And I have had a couple of crashes when just doing some edits and the graph just regenerates all the time. So what I've done is add a few checkboxes to disable some of the more heavy features. So right now it's just the basics. Over here you can see it's trees, rocks, path, and that generates like all the basic stuff. And then I have more detailed stuff like shrubs around the trees, grass around the trees, bushes, foliage that just spawns along the riverbanks, and detailed plants that spawn on rocks, on fallen logs, on whatever you put into it. And I've made 3 distinct sort of brushes, I'd say. The first one is a BP forest, which is simply a round spline that is tagged with the forest biome tag, and that's how you get, like, I covered how to get spline data from that in a video. And the second one is road, which creates path. And the third one is not actually a tool that I've made, but it's Unreal's default like river splines and water tools. So if I drag in a river body, it should pick up on that. I guess it's not generating. Let's just regenerate. There we go. Now it's picking up on that. And the reason I haven't created a custom or like the reason I've used the water tools is because they are pretty good for this use case. So no need in reinventing the wheel. Yeah, and that's the 3 tools. So let's get into the graph. That would be this one. So it doesn't look that complicated, but that's because I've put a lot of stuff into subgraphs. And I'm going to go over like roughly what each of them does before going into detail. This is probably going to be a longer video, so hope it stays interesting. So what we first do is I've got a graph that just samples the water. So this goes over the water splines and creates a bunch of rock points, and it does create sort of a bunch of points that are used to mask out other graphs. And then the same for the path. So this one goes through all the path actors that are tagged with path and gives out the points on the path. And there's another one that's called detail points. That's essentially the path also spawns fallen trees, and on those trees sometimes plants can spawn, and these are the points that are given out there. These things go into forest data. So forest data takes all the forest biome splines, places points in them, uses the water and the path to mask out areas, and then returns points where trees and foliage should spawn. It is then put into a self-pruning node to sparse out the data, and this is then with some processing put into the trees graph, and that actually spawns the tree foliage. doing another thing, and that is some of the points with like a combination of density noise and density filters, plus the rocks that the river gives out gets put into the rock spawner, and that takes care of spawning all the rocks and pebbles and everything. And then I'm feeding that back into a difference, because where there are big rocks spawning in the forest, there shouldn't be trees. So I'm cutting out the tree placements, so there's like holes in the tree data. And then the rocks and the path both return detail points, which I'm unioning here, so like they're combined, and then pass into the detail plans graph, and that takes care of spawning everything. So I'm gonna quickly show what each of the things, how it looks. So I'm going to disable everything. First of all is the trees. So if I'm spawning trees, you can see it takes wherever there's tree splines and creates this tree biome there. And it's also cutting through the path and the river. The second is rocks. So this generates points along the river, and then every big rock can also spawn smaller rocks, and then there are some random ones where the forest is. And lastly, path essentially just follows the spline and scatters a bunch of smaller like pebbles and some fallen trees here and there. And it might be a bit much, but that's all right. So then we have another thing. So there's like detail settings, and these are the more expensive ones. So I'm going to go through them one by one. First of all, we have shrubs. So shrubs is sort of whatever's on the border of the forest. So if I disable that, you can see the border of the forest is kind of just empty. And if I enable that, it's filled with like ferns and monsteras and stuff. Then we have we have grass, which spawns around these like smaller trees. Don't ask me like if this is something that's biologically plausible. I know spawning smaller plants around bigger plants is sort of a rule of nature for the one or other reason, but I've just thought it looked cool, so that's what I'm going with. And then there's a similar thing with these large trees spawning bushes around them. So you can see here is a bush spawning, and they are like, they really make the jungle really dense. So if I disable this, you can see it looks pretty sparse and not really jungly. But if I enable the bushes, this really covers like the ground layer. So in nature, a forest, pretty much any forest has different layers of lower plants and medium-sized plants and really tall plants, and they just try and take up all the space. So I'm kind of simulating that. And then there's another kind of, it's just something I played with, and that's shore foliage. So I'm gonna disable the other and just enable shore foliage. And you can see some cool like plants that could be, you know, growing next to water. And they are only spawned where if it's in a forest biome and if it's close to the water edge. And then the last one, I'm a bit hesitant on this one because this is the most computationally aggressive one and has crashed a couple of times. So I'm just going to enable the rocks for now and nothing else. And then I'm going to enable detail plans. This takes the points that other generators make, so the rocks and the path generators do create extra points and they get placed into the detail plans, and that was spawning all the plants on other stuff. So you can see like foliage growing on rocks. And if I enable path, please don't crash. There we go. So you can see on the fallen tree trunks there's also foliage spawning. So that's the overview. And now I'm going to go into all the generators one by one and all the graphs and kind of roughly analyze what's going on. Again, nothing in this is new information if you have checked out the rest of the series. It's just, you know, more of it. So let's go with path. The first, this is sort of the, I guess, easiest because it's almost the same as the spline tutorial. First, I'm getting points of a spline, and then I am randomizing them. I have this here, which is a this is my way of filtering stuff, like enabling and disabling features of the graph. So I'm getting a bunch of random points. I'm creating a point grid, and then I'm copying this point grid in a randomized fashion to the points on the spline. This is essentially what actually enable the path. This is then actually where assets get placed on the path. And the reason I have this density filter here is because of the way I'm masking out stuff. So here I have the checkbox enable path, and I essentially, for every toggle, I have a simple select node that plugs in a certain density attribute into the blueprint. So if I enable it, the density is 1. If I disable it, the density is 0. And in every subgraph, I have sort of this filter where the property, in this case, I've named it pebble density. The naming might not be completely like uniform here, but it works. And then I plug it into the upper bound of a density filter, and by default, all the points that are created are density 1. And if the density filter is between 0 and 0, none of the points pass. So essentially, none of the points are copied, and that, you know, means nothing happens. And that's how I disable features in every of the subgraphs. All right, in case it's enabled, we'll just do a bit of transform, a bit of projecting on the landscape, a bit of randomization, and then at the end, I'm gonna do a density noise and filter out like some get essentially to become what's it called, one type of rock, and some are becoming another type of rock, and they have different offset settings. So that's why I did that. So they all like get sunk in the ground and don't kind of weirdly stick up. And similarly, on the other hand, I do another density for the tree trunks, which has a density filter that is like almost like lets almost nothing through. So there's not too many trees. And then I spawn the tree trunks here. And this is almost it. So one more thing, the actual points that get generated on the spline, they are transformed to to actually have a certain size and then output in the out. So this is sort of the actual path mask. And then on the tree trunks, I am doing a mesh to points with the mesh that the fallen tree is using, and copy that to points, do a normal to density, and have another mask for like if density plants are enabled or not. And this is, let me see if this can be, too many things debugging at the same time. I'm turning this off. Oh yeah, density plants are enabled, so actually it's not doing anything. But this is the same thing I showed in the video with like mesh sampling, and you spawn plants on the mesh. And these are output as a secondary output because this graph is not taking care of spawning actual detailed plants. It's just providing the spawn locations. All right, that's the path. Next up, the water is pretty similar. So the only, I guess, interesting thing here is that I am doing river sampling and lake sampling. So Epic has a river tool that is like just a continuous spline, and then a lake that is a closed spline, and I'm just kind of sampling the shorelines of both, and then also the volume, because I want to make sure that it's not the volume, it's like the 2D volume, like a better term, I can't think of it right now, so that no forest spawns in the river and also not inside the lake. And then also on the shoreline, I'm generating a few points, and that's where the rocks are gonna get spawned. And this is just combining the mask, like the sort of bigger extent points, so we can mask out the forest. And yeah, so the rock points get exported as a rocks point cloud, and the mask as a mask point cloud, and that's it. Oh, another thing maybe to note is that I'm not doing by tag on the spline data, I'm doing by class, because for some reason the splines cannot be tagged in the editor. So I'm not sure what that reason is, but there you go. And I guess now it's time for the forest, which is sort of the main attraction, I guess. Similarly, I have again sampling splines and doing some spline stuff. I'm gonna enable the trees and get into some debugging. So I'm gonna actually disable the tree spawning. I'm just gonna take care of the data generation for now. So the first thing it does is just like in the one video, filling splines with points, taking a certain distance from it, and creating a heat map from it. Then I am sort of making sure. So that's the thing I've noticed is when you scale splines, it can happen that the points get also scaled. So you might end up with a lot bigger spawn trees than before. So this is like a safeguard where I just say, okay, set the absolute scale of these points to 1, so we don't run into any surprises. Next is a custom node that converts the density to height. So you get these funny little mountain ranges. The reason I'm doing this is because I wanna use the density to sort of differentiate between different types of plants. So low density, in this case, will spawn shrubs, mid density will spawn small trees, and high density will spawn the biggest trees. However, as far as I found, lots of the nodes will just override density. So I needed a way to store this in another way. So I'm kind of converting the density value to the bounds, and that is happening in a custom node. Just like I showed in the custom node video, it is essentially just taking the density and modifying the bounds based on that. It's the same thing. And then I do another distance, and this is where the density is overridden. So I lose the previous density. And this distance goes and creates a mask for the river. So it takes the points made by the river graph and creates like a density mask. And what I'm doing then is I apply the density to height again. But what I did is I created a parameter called clamp min height. So it will apply the new data, like shrink everything that is low density, but keep the old. So doing that leads to sort of these valleys in the forest data, and that should simulate sort of forest edges towards rivers. And then I do another thing, and I actually cut out the points that are in the river or in the path. So like the water mask and the path mask, they're both actually cut from the data. And this is how it looks like. So you can see it actually cuts away a bit more, but this means you won't have like a super low forest at that point, but it's not going to be like a deep forest, because if you look at references of like forests on rivers, you tend to have the trees, the foliage come up right to the river, but I don't know, be it by sediment movement or flooding or whatever, you won't find really big trees right next to a river. It's most certainly like bushes and smaller trees, and like has this sort of curvature towards the like center of the forest. And then for path, I'm not doing any changing of the height. It just cuts away the data because I imagine the path has been cut through the forest. So the road, path, whatever is man-made, and the forest is just literally cut down. So the vegetation had no way of adapting to that this quickly. Lastly, I'm projecting on landscape. So far all the operations have been 2D, just on the plane, but obviously we want to have this forest grow on the landscape, so I'm projecting it there. And what I'm doing now is I'll do like the reverse. So I'll take the height and convert it back into density. And this looks like this. So depending how high a point is, it has like a higher or lower density. And then I make sure that the points are upright, so the projected landscape kind of just projects it along the normal, but trees usually grow up. So doing that and having them grow up, and also add a bit of random rotation. And that's what the forest data does. It does not take care of any spawning because the data is going to be a bit processed before it ends up spawning trees. Right, so for spawning the trees, what I'm doing is I'll just add it to the self-pruning, and you can see it ends up making it very sparse, which is okay because these are mostly like larger trees, and if there are too many of them, it looks weird. But I'm also taking the same data and generating a bunch of like just random points. I'm just picking some at random, and these will be rock heaps essentially. And then this gets put into a union with the water rocks, and this ends up giving me where all the rocks should spawn. I'm going to go into the rocks in a second, but essentially what the rocks do, they spawn one per point, one large rock, and then a sort of arrangement of pebbles around them. The output is a bounding box where the large rock is, and the detail points again are where the plants are going to be spawned. Now I'm taking the output of the large rocks and I'm going to plug it into a difference, and that means wherever there are large rocks, trees will not grow. So this is how it looks, and from, I guess you can't really tell because they are very sparse, but yeah, there should never be a tree where there's a rock. And then lastly, this gets put into the trees, so I'm gonna enable that and go into this next. The tree spawner is kind of straightforward. So it does, again, this density filter is just for enabling and disabling the feature. This adds a bit of random scale because having all the trees be the same size would look weird. So I'm just scaling everything, applying a noise, and this noise is with multiply. And the reason for that is the data that gets out of the first generation is very uniform. So it's a very like smooth curve, and in nature nothing is really smooth, so I'm doing a bit of manipulation here, so there's a bit more variety. And then last step is sort of this data gets split into 3 different sets. The first one is the high values, so the highest values get converted into big trees. And the second is the sort of medium values get converted into medium trees. And the last one is the lower values, and that gets converted into shrubs. So effectively there's 3 stages to this forest. And since the points are a bit more randomized, you'll have a sort of overlap between all the different layers. And then, yeah, the high trees is pretty straightforward. Just spawn high trees where the points, the lower trees as well. The shrubs is actually like a separate graph because it does a bit of scattering on its own and a bit of randomization on its own. And then the big trees spawn bushes and the medium trees spawn grass. So they take the generated instances and use them as a spawn point for more foliage. And same for the shrubs. And the shrubs return, like the rocks, a bound, which is then used to mask out the grass because it just looks kind of unappealing if there's grass sticking through the leaves of like larger shrubs. So that's just why it's a artistic choice. Okay, and then like all of the spawners look pretty similar. It's create points on grids, copy the points to where the stuff is. So let me see if I can quickly debug this. Oh, because I disabled bushes, so it's not showing. Oh, there we go. So it's just creating random points around the big trees and then scattering them and scaling them based on distance and all that stuff. So trees, like bushes that are close to the tree, are bigger, and those that are farther away have like a fade out scale. And then I do a bit of culling so that it's not so many. This is like also kind of artistic. How much do you think looks good, and also how much do you think is necessary before your graphics card is like starts to complain. Do a bit of randomization on them, and then finally spawn the shrubs, and then do a bounce modifier. So what this does is, you can see it doesn't match like perfectly, but it's good enough for cutting out stuff. So based on how big the shrub is, it creates a bounding box, and this is used in the grass generator to cut out like any grass instances that overlap these boxes. And then, yeah, heading to grass. It's essentially the same graph. The only difference is that there's a difference that cuts out the shrub mask that gets passed in. And yeah, the shrubs, again, you can already tell it's sort of almost the same layout because all of these graphs do like mostly the same thing. I have tried to figure out a way to sort of do it in a more parameterized way, to just like pass in like scatter distance, max min scale and stuff, but it just hasn't quite worked. So if I figure out how to do that properly, like you can pass in parameters from the blueprint itself, but I kind of wanted to have a sort of like a material function, but for PCG, but I wasn't kind of able to figure that out yet. So to be continued, I hope, on that. So that's why I just copy pasted the graph like 3 or 4 times. And that's how the trees spawn. And that is, I should probably disable, oh, it's already disabled, good. And then the big rocks is this one. Like I said before, the points where the big rocks are created comes from the forest itself and also from the river. And it's fairly similar to all the other ones, to all the other graphs so far. We have like the big rock points are defined by the input, and then it does spawn smaller rocks by doing a grid and copying the grid around the rock points. Why isn't that showing up? Let me go. So like you can see, grid is happening. I do put a transform here, so the grid is not like perfectly at the place where the rock is, because if every rock, they tend to be more freestanding, but if every rock has like a perfect circle of smaller rocks around them, it looks kind of weird and unnatural. So what I did is I added a transform offset to the big point before scattering points around them, and that leads to you can see some rocks are more like central, some rocks are more to the side, and yeah, you can see like here this rock is almost at the border of its grid, and that looks a lot better in my opinion. Do a bit of randomization, so like scatter them around and then project them on the landscape So they are actually, oh, that's not debugging, but you know, why are you not debugging? It should show up. It's not doing that. If I have, I guess you just have to trust me on this. Well, those work again. All right. So I do a distance check, so you can see the further away rocks are, like smaller rocks, the darker they get. And then I apply a little noise, do some filtering, and at the end, not many remain. So there's like a small portion of rocks remains. And then I do a scale by density, which again won't show, but this makes it so that the rocks that have a lower density have a smaller scale, and those that have a higher density have a higher scale. And then I do another density noise on them. Okay, this shows again, and you can see it kind of go through and make sure that there's not too many big rocks and too many small rocks, because otherwise it will probably look too uniform. So I'm filtering out some more rocks, and then end up with even less, and in the end do like a random transform, because this turns the rocks in every sort of just rotation direction, and then spawn them, and that's it. And you have all the rocks here. And then I do another, I basically do the same step twice. To generate points where the foliage should spawn, what I do is, I, like with the fallen tree, I use the mesh to points with the rock and copy the points to wherever the big rocks are. And this density noise again is just like enabling, disabling the feature. And same with the smaller points. So yeah, they just generate a bunch of features, a bunch of points. I'm doing a density filter, a density noise and density filter here because just the sheer amount of points generated is just too much to handle, because like every rock has a couple, so every big rock has like a couple, let's say 20, 30 smaller rocks, and each of those smaller rocks has, I don't know, ballpark like 1,000, maybe 2,000 polygons, and like that's all the points that get generated, and putting that all into spawning is just a surefire way to crash your PC. So what I've done is I have set actually a very aggressive density filter, so like almost no of the points make it, so to say. But it's still a lot, and they are not debugging because probably because I disabled the detail plans. So yeah, you can see it's still a lot of points that get output. And actually, if I debug this one, you can see on the big rocks I actually don't do that much density filtering, and there's just so many points. So yeah, it's a good way to make sure there's not too much data. Yeah, that's getting output as detail points. And then I guess the last one we haven't covered yet is back in the big subgraph, actually spawning the detail points, plants. Yeah, it's doing a union here. So the detail points from the rocks and from the water. Is it the water? No, from the fallen trees gets joined here and then put into detail plans. And this is fairly simple. It does a normal to density, which means only points that are pointing up sort of are retained. And that's not showing. That's all right. So I'm gonna do that. So we can kind of tell, maybe a little smaller. So you can kind of tell all the points that are below, like not facing up, they have 0 density, and all the ones facing up have 1. And then I filter all of them out. Oops. This filter, which again isn't showcasing, but you can go back and watch the mesh sampling video. It's the same process. And I'm just doing another noise, another filter, and another pruning because it's a lot of points and you need to get rid of a lot. And still, I feel like it's crowded, but I haven't really found a good way to properly contain how much is spawned per square meter. I don't know. But yeah, whatever points remain, do a bit of randomization on it and spawn the plants. And that is the whole system, I think. Yeah. The reason, so like just kind of working with it, if I have everything on, it is impossible to work with because it just, every edit generates such an amount of data that it's kind of impossible to feasibly work in real time. So what I do is only really the trees and the like way they interact with stuff is important. So everything gets turned off. So I say working with it, I'm not planning on doing much with it. It's like a test, but I kind of, I guess, role play using this in production. So yeah, if I have everything turned off and I'm moving stuff around and like, you know, adding new biomes or like new forest patches somewhere like here, and it's all nice and works really fast. Let's just copy the whole river. Why not? Maybe, you know, do this and that. So that's like nice and fast. Not sure why it's not updating. Sometimes the, I don't know, river system doesn't really trigger the on-demand refresh on the graph. So I don't know, I guess it doesn't recognize this has changed, but yeah, it does work. And then when I'm like happy and finished with the composition, with like how much foliage is there, I'll go and enable like one feature after the other and see how it's turning out. I'm gonna enable everything except the detail plans. And then it's like, yeah, this looks great, cool. So I can enable detail plans and just wait for a while because it's just this many points. And there's probably ways to improve how many points you actually need. Like you could cull the points already by like before sampling, before copying the points. You know, that's down to like implementation and production. I actually forgot about one other generator in this thing. My apologies. So let's just get rid of everything. Oh, that was too much clicking too fast. Unreal is frozen. There we go. Okay, cool. No crash so far. And that is the shoreline plants. So what I did is using the forest points and the river points, wherever there's sort of an overlap or like close to the border of water, I generate an additional mask and spawn some points there. So that is that. Do I have it enabled? Yes. Okay. Essentially just doing a distance between where the river is and where the trees are, doing a density remapping, so it's like the other way around, and then a noise to get a bit variety, and then a filter to not add up with too many. And these are the spawn points for like shoreline plants. And yeah, do a bit of randomization, do project to landscape, and then spawn them essentially. And these are like these plants. You notice them popping up. So what I've discovered is that you can actually in the static mesh spawner set curl start and end distance. I assume it's meant to be the same as with like foliage painting. However, I'm not quite sure why it's popping. It's not setting the, like not fading the instances. Maybe due to the material, I haven't checked it out. Because it wasn't much of a deal. So yeah, and that is everything. I'm just gonna re-enable the everything. I created too many tasks. disable this. Yeah, that's how you make a jungle, a procedural jungle. If you're interested in the asset pack, I've got it from the marketplace, and I'll put a link in the description. The creator that made this asset pack has also made another one that looks even better, but I haven't checked that out yet. So yeah, if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments. I probably won't be doing another tutorial for a while now. I know I've been like just firing these out in a matter of days because I was really interested, but I do have other things that take priority now. Yeah, I'll keep experimenting around with PCG, and when I do another video, I hope you check it out, and I hope this helps, and wish you best of luck with PCG. Bye.